Engine of Evolution by Stephanie Castro.
Jason Wadley.
Jeffrey Aguga.
Natural selection is a process where nature selects varying phenotypes due to different survival and reproductive success of individuals. There are 3 requirements for natural selection. 1 is variation, 2 is differential survival and reproduction, and 3 is heritability. Selection acts on the population and not the individual.
We will be talking about de novo versus exaptation, selection in vitro versus selection in the wild, and finally, intelligent design. Survival is key to natural selection. It means that a dominant trait allowed the individual to survive in a dire situation. Dominant traits are useful for survival. For example, the small-sized European honeybees introduced in Japan have no match for the larger-sized Asian giant hornet. With use of scouting and brute force, the hornets prey on these European bees into the brink of extinction from the new environment. But it can be avoided if either they are reintroduced or have found a way to adapt to defend themselves against the hornets. However, the native honeybees in Japan figured out how to defend themselves against the hornet by using adaptive behavioral tactics. The bees lure the hornets inside the hive, and inside, the bees are prepared and waiting to ambush, and once it happens, the bee swarms the hornet, forming a ball, and then the bees vibrate their abdomen that generates heat that cooks the hornets to death. If an organism survives up to their reproductive age, then they are able to reproduce and pass on their genes. The genes of the surviving individual are most likely to be seen in the next generation. For example, we see a parasitic relationship between roundworms and Central American ants. The roundworm can infect Central American ants as a way to reproduce. This infection disrupts and manipulates the behavior and appearance of the ant. The infection causes the ant to turn its abdomen from black to red, and also the ant becomes sluggish and raises its abdomen for predators to see. The infection also affects the production of alarm pheromones of the ant, so it can't signal other ants that it's being attacked. The ant's alteration attracts birds that will eat them, and once eaten, the roundworm's eggs are then carried by the bird, which will be defecated, which is only to be found and scavenged by the same type of ants, and it is fed to the ant larvae, in which the worm eggs hatches inside the ant, which will move to the abdomen, repeating the same adaptive reproductive cycle of the roundworm.
Adaptation and driving force. Adaptation is where one trait holds increasing reproductive success over another. There is no going downhill in evolution of an adaptation, because if you were to go downhill, there would be no positive outcome for the individual. Adaptation also can only occur if there's a variation within the population. Evolution needs to build off a more fit individual and cannot if all individuals are the same. For example, adaptation can be seen in the coat color of mice. Mice survive better in the environment if their fur color matches the soil which they live on. This was tested by Donald Kaufman at Kansas State University. He built 2 large enclosures, one fit with light soil and another with dark soil. In each cage, he placed equal amounts of light and dark-coated mice. He then released a hungry owl into the cage. After returning, Kaufman found that the mice that contrasted most with the soil they lived in were eaten, while those that matched most closely to the soil camouflaged and survived. Those that survived will not pass on the alleles that were favored in the population. This supports the idea that adaptation is not a downhill evolution. There is a benefit to why one coated mouse was favored over the other. If adaptation was an uphill evolution, the mice that were killed would have to been able to pass on their genes, which could not happen since they did not survive long enough for them to produce offspring. As shown in the diagram below, there is a tan-colored mouse over dark soil and a darker coated mouse over dark soil. Natural selection would work in a way that would pick off the less similar colored mouse to the environment which it's found. This happens because the predator will more easily see the tan mouse over dark soil and not be able to see as clearly the camouflaged dark mouse over dark soil. Exaptation and gradual change. Evolution does not act as quick as Kaufman observed in his experiment of one fur color favoring another in the environment they are in. Natural selection actually runs very slow. Each new trait has evolved from an earlier pre-existing trait. It is not created by de novo, which is from scratch. However, it is created through exaptation. Another misconception is that humans will be able to observe macroevolutionary changes in populations over time. This is wrong because macroevolution are changes which are observed above species level and are not changes found in the individual. Microevolution, on the other hand, are small changes or small features of a species that change over time. In our lifetime, we may be able to observe small evolutionary changes, though we can observe macroevolutionary changes from the fossil record, as shown from peacock feathers and head sizes in the diagram below. It is estimated that this change could have taken over hundreds of thousands of years to have evolved into the sizes they are today. This fossil record also supports that feathers have grown from pre-existing sizes slowly and gradually. The feathers of the peacocks did not just magically grow and double its original length over one individual. The smallest and largest feather head and sizes are shown to have many intermediates that built from each other.
People are always interested in seeing how selection works exactly. How could we show how the basic principles of natural selection work when it usually takes several years to take effect? We choose species with short generation time and are adapting to new environments, such as bacterial populations. Bacterial resistance to drugs is one of the best examples we have of showing selection in action. Let's say this person has used a certain antibiotic before to combat an infection of some sort. He takes them, he gets better. He then gets the same infection again and is prescribed the same antibiotics again, since they worked well last time. Let's say this keeps happening until one day the antibiotics no longer work. Some people mistake this phenomenon with them getting used to this particular antibiotic, when in reality what has happened is the bacteria have become resistant to the drug. Evolution has happened. This is such the case of the world we are living in today. The evolution of resistance has pharmaceutical companies busy in the constant find and development of new drugs that combat the now super microbes. Does this mean that every microbe will become resistant to the drugs we introduce them to? Not necessarily, because the theory of evolution is not saying that everything will and must evolve. If the right mutations for these bacteria to become resistant don't arise ever, evolution will not happen. The thing about natural selection is that it produces an adaptive response when the population encounters some type of stress or change in their environment. Selection in the wild. Yet people are not convinced. They want to see natural selection in action in the wild, with no human intervention. They do not want to see in vitro experiments. They want to see it happening all in their own lifetime in the wild. The problem with this is that this is happening very, very slowly. We might get to see changes at the molecular level, but nothing macro, at least in our human lifespan. Natural selection does happen a lot faster when a species meets a new environmental change or challenge compared to when there is nothing to adapt to. For example, moths during the Industrial Revolution, the environment at that time was rapidly changing. Which moths do you think would have had a better chance of survival in the environment with the trees that were covered in all these black ashes and waste? Just like we mentioned in our previous example with the mice, the black or dark colored moths would camouflage themselves better than the white moths in these trees. Therefore, the black ones would reproduce and change the gene pool for that population of moths, favoring this one. Can selection build complexity? Creationists usually debate that selection is capable of making small changes but not able to make big and complex ones. Sure, it can change the size of beaks in birds, but can it also go as far as to come up with something so complex such as the human brain? How can we be sure that selection was involved in this development of complex traits? Well, first we must ask, what theory is the alternate theory to selection being the driving force of these complex traits? This theory is creationism or intelligent design. Intelligent design is unscientific in its claims because they are untestable. Their most compelling argument they have about evidence is known as the God of the gaps. Since we do not understand everything about how selection works and how it builds a trait, this lack of understanding should be evidence enough of supernatural creation. which is preposterous as we know in the scientific community that things are always changing, always being tested, and new findings always come up to change the thing we used to think was the norm before. As we do more and more research, these mysteries of the universe and the world we live in get solved. This is how intelligent designers' credibility gets diminished with each advance in our understanding. Research is what keeps us from ignorance and immediately give all the credit to an almighty creator. The thing is, traits evolve in a certain order that makes Darwinian sense. If this did not occur and things just happen randomly, then and only then we can think of intelligent design as an option to explain things. There are proteins and enzymes that have complex functions in the human body that at some point before had a completely different function in groups that evolved before us. Quote, the common ancestor of sea cucumbers and vertebrates had a gene that was later co-opted in vertebrates for a new function, precisely as evolution predicts, says Coyne. So, intelligent design believers suggest that natural selection cannot be responsible for complex traits such as the human eye, for example. Their claim is that it could have not been formed in gradual steps leading to a good one because who or what could have good use of a half good eye? Well, given everything we have discussed so far, we know that species evolve given their specific environment and how it changes over time. So wouldn't it make sense that a half good eye would be just good enough for the specific environment of a species, and it only changed because its environment changed and the half good eye was no longer just as useful? In conclusion, you must remember that weak forces that operate over long periods of time can have a large impact and create change in the large scale of things. Natural selection is one of these driving forces, as it is the cause of all adaptive evolution, but not responsible of every feature of evolution, as there are many other things that can affect it too.